Okay, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Who are you? Is this your first time here? If so, welcome to you. All the rest of y'all, what's up? What is good, y'all? And if you need to take a little time to think about that, that's okay. It might not be obvious. You might have to look carefully to see it, but it's there, I think. I trust. Seriously, how's everyone doing? I hope this finds you in an okay moment. I wonder how the weather is where you are. I ask because I'm sweating, y'all. It's hot in the attic this week. I waited. I didn't do it in the morning, and so now it's late afternoon on a hot summer day. And I turned off the fans and closed the windows so that we'd get better sound. And I'm sweating like within seconds. So we'll see. We're doing a little bit of like a sauna intro here. I wonder how it is for you. If your summer is going okay. I think I was asking last week or the week before if people's lives were feeling normal again, and I didn't get any answers. Nobody answered me. I guess it was sort of rhetorical. But regardless of whether or not life's feeling normal, whatever that means, it's taking place, right? You're listening to this, so that means that you're alive right now. Breath's happening, heart's beating. It continues to happen regardless of my struggling or worrying. And I, as I've said before, do take some comfort in that, actually. In any case, I hope you're having an okay summer, and I hope that life is meeting you kindly. I've been thinking a lot about practice. I'm in the middle of this teacher training. I'm going to do it again next year. It's decided. I'll let you know when the dates are going to be announced. But in any case, I'm doing this teacher training, and we're kind of right in the middle of it now. And I've just been thinking a lot about personal practice. What that means. I've talked about it so many times in workshops that I've done, and some on this show here and there in different conversations about the group yoga class context and the difference between having a practice by yourself at home and sort of different aspects of what a personal sadhana is, which is more than just the breathing and moving exercises. So it's something I've been thinking a lot about. And if you've been listening to the show of late, you know I've been talking all about these questions of like spirit and the doing part of practice, and then the state, like the parts of it that you don't do, that or when the doing stops. And I've been, talking about some kind of animate forces or higher powers or universal consciousnesses. Or is that right? You can't say consciousness is universal consciousness. In any case, all of these things have been swirling around and have been interweaving with what I've been working on in the training with the folks who are doing that with me. And right about then, this old friend of mine, my guest today, Karin Carlson, she wrote this fantastic piece about prayer, essentially. But it's more than just prayer. It's also in the context of who she is. And she's been on the show before. She was on the show years ago. You'll hear. And she recently decided to part ways with her yoga teacher hat. And then wrote this amazing piece about prayer. So it brought together a lot of things that have been on my mind and I've been thinking about and working with. And it's one of these moments again where the universe throws me one of these podcast conversations that I definitely didn't plan for, that seems to tie right in and be the exact conversation that I need to have in this moment. So the synchronicity was strong, and it was a real joy to reconnect with Karin. And it's really my pleasure to be bringing it to you today. Real quick before we do that, I want to send some love to our podcast premium subscribers, without which we really couldn't be doing the show the way we're doing it. Specifically today, I want to shout out Dawn Sopran and Beverly Martin. Dawn and Bev, old friends, longtime supporters of this show. Shout out to you, Dawn and Beverly. Appreciate you both a lot. If you're new around here and you don't know, the last 52 episodes of this show are always on the public feed. We do also have a premium subscription. And this is a way to access the archives, but also to show your support for the show. It's choose your rate, cancel at any time. If you don't have money, you just email us and then we send you a free account. But if you do have a little something to give, it definitely makes a difference, and we're very grateful for that. If you want to learn more about becoming a podcast premium subscriber, or you want to find out about all the other stuff I'm doing, the weekly live stream classes and the ongoing teacher sangha, all the other stuff that I do besides just this show that you're listening to, everything can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. Like I said, I'm sweating, so we're going to keep it brief. I will touch base with you on the other side, but for now, let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Karin Carlson. Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Karin.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi, it's good to hear your voice.
It's really good to hear your voice, you know? It's so amazing the way things come round and round again.
It is. It is.
And, you know, I always do this thing whenever someone's a return visit to the show. And just to say, I'm already recording, so please consider us live in a sense, I suppose.
Got it.
I always look to see how long has it been since I had them on the show, since I spoke to them last. A lot of times, because some people I speak to off air and some people I don't, you know?
Right.
And I looked and I spoke to you last in October of 2018.
Wow, that was a long time ago. I didn't realize it was that long ago.
I know, it feels like a couple of lifetimes ago at this point.
It does, but you came onto some of my programming in the meantime, so we have spoken since then.
Yes, we've always had a little bit of a ongoing in touchness, which I've appreciated.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to me in this moment, hearing your voice and kind of being flooded with the whole chain of all the times we've interacted over the years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm right there with you.
There's a certain kind of melancholy feeling to it in a very good way for me. I don't think of that as a bad thing, but I think it's because the things that we've connected on often seemed to involve having to take a hard look and ultimately embrace kind of the shadows.
True that. Very true.
And I feel like you do that in your writing, especially that last piece you wrote. Kudos on that last piece. I have read it a bunch of times and I've thought about it a lot. It was very powerful. Thank you for writing it.
Yeah, thank you for reading it. There's more coming. I envision that piece being one of many. So there's more coming.
I mean, if that's any indication of what's to come, I'm excited to see what you're going to put out. And I'm really envious too, because it's interesting, and maybe this is somewhere for us to start. Well, first of all, where are you right now? I don't even know where you are in the world.
Minneapolis. Minneapolis is home and has been home for going on 15 years.
Okay. Well, what I was going to say before I sidetracked there was I was also thinking of the last thing that I remember you writing. You might have written something else, but about you like quitting yoga. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting to me about that is in it, you specifically referenced a guru of yours, which I'm kind of intrigued by, but also that this person for you asked you this question and the response is at some point she said, no, I didn't ask you what you think you're supposed to do. I'm asking what you want to do.
Yeah.
And that for me is that's kind of where my yoga started. Someone said that to me. Instead of like, what do you not want to do? What do you want to do? And I told them a bunch of things I didn't want to do. And they said, no, that's not what I asked you.
Yep, exactly. That's not what I'm asking. That's not what I'm asking.
I said, I want to know what you want to do. And that's how I ended up going yoga. But for you, it's telling you to maybe leave it. I don't know what you mean by leaving it. So I guess I'm curious, when you say you're quitting yoga, does that mean you just want to let go of having the responsibility of teaching classes for a while so you can write? Is that what that is really meaning?
Oh gosh, what does it mean? I don't know what it means either, to be totally honest with you. And it's terrifying. It does mean that I am not going to be teaching yoga classes, yoga asana classes anymore. But to be totally blunt, I haven't taught asana classes for 3 years, but I've been teaching yoga philosophy and I've been running a program that is a weird anti-200-hour thing, but I'm not going to do that anymore either. And just this morning, I was like, all right, am I going to shut the website down? And what do I do with all of the, the videos and the writing and all of that stuff that has been there? But I am very explicitly so that I can write. Yeah, that's the idea. Stepping away.
Interesting. Well, let me ask you something, because the last time we spoke 4 years ago, if I can recall, I didn't listen to it again before talking to you now, but I have a memory of it. It was quite a bit we talked about teacher training and we had issues, as we probably still do. Right. But we talked about trying to find a way to maintain integrity and having a smaller group of people. And I know you did do that. You set up a bunch of stuff. I guess I want to shout out, I think we have a mutual friend, Sebastian. I remember talking to Sebastian. He was doing some of your groups and stuff. So has that not been fruitful for you? Or I guess I'm curious about the decision. And I'll say one other thing about that. I'll say that as someone who always fancied myself a writer and really has let it go some this year because I've just been too overwhelmed. I haven't really found the space. And I really understand when they talk about like the cabin in the woods.
Oh, I do too.
And I've often fantasized about what it would be to just like not do the podcast and the teaching and anything else and just write.
Yeah. Oh, you're on so many things. You're on so many things that I don't think have very good answers. Even like the cabin in the woods. Like, yes, I fantasize about that all of the time. But you know what? I've gone to a cabin in the woods and all I did, it was early in pandemic. So I slept and cried. I didn't write this thing. So like, is it a question of like, well, I can't do both? I don't think that's necessarily true, but it's always like, what are the circumstances? What is the context? And it's in time too, right? Like, were the programs, after I stopped doing a traditional 200-hour teacher training, I started this anti-200-hour teacher training that was all online, much more mentorship based and kind of intended to take up personal sadhana and the questions that like ethical and spiritual and business questions that most teacher trainings don't touch. And then teachers are like left alone to grapple with these questions. So the attempt was to offer something different than a conventional teacher training. And I think that it worked. I think that it was worth the time. It was a good thing. But just because something is a good thing, does that mean it's always a good thing? That you should keep on doing it? Like it served a good thing for me. I think that it helped a lot of people. But does that mean that I should just keep pumping it out?
Well, I guess if you rely on it for your livelihood, then sometimes you do.
Right. But then that brings up the question of like, well, why are we doing the things we are doing? Are we doing them because we feel like we should? Are we doing like just the little decisions of like, am I going to work with this person? Is this the right thing for me to do? Is this the next right thing for me to study? Are we doing that out of some sense of imposter syndrome? Are we doing it out of fear? Are we doing it out of financial, like, I have to do this gig because I need to pay? And that can get problematic, I think, when we're talking about yoga.
Yeah.
Like every decision I made in terms of running a yoga business, and like I've done all the things from running a studio to running a teacher training to like for all of the things. Whenever I made a decision that was based purely in finances, it ended up being a bad decision.
Isn't that the truth?
Whenever I made a decision that was like, no, I got to check in and hear like what really is the thing of integrity for me to do, then it was fine. Even if it was hard. I'm not saying it's not hard. It's terrifying. I was telling some of the people that are kind of still around my communities that every time I've kind of stepped away from the yoga industry in some sense, or stepped away from a teacher that is like, this isn't working anymore, it has felt like it might be suicide. Like this might be the end of my teaching career. If I shut down the studio, if I shut down this program, I'm not sure that it'll go forward or I will go forward. But every time when it has been a decision that is coming from a, like, I know what I need to do here, it ends up being okay. And generally speaking, I end up in a better financial position. I end up with more time and enjoying what I'm offering instead of just like having to do the things we have to do. But I also recognize that that is a very privileged thing to be able to say. Like, money is real. Money is so real. So these are tricky things that I don't think it's just like, yes, it was good, or no, it was the wrong thing. It was the right thing at that time, fully enjoyed it. But I also kind of feel like, all right, it did its job. Now I can let it go.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's so amazing to hear you say all that, because I just started to do this online training at the beginning of the year. First time I ever did it after swearing off training since before I spoke to you in 2018. And it's really been this process of like evaluating all the things I used to teach in teacher training and what is actually working for me in practice now, like what has actually held true over all these years and what should be let go of, you know? And it's all in the context of the pandemic over the last 2 years too, especially this last year. And it's been amazing how much of it has led to this process of like you're describing, of like this, you know, we talked about it 4 years ago at contemplative aspects of practice. And I've been having all of these people on. I don't know if you've been listening to this show at all, but I've had all these people on and I'm asking them all about spirit, asking them about whether or not they ever use the word God. And talking about, like just this week, we're talking about practice as ritual rather than technology. And what it's come down to for me is that on some level, I think I always thought of my practice as a form of prayer. Like I actually remember saying that as like a form of prayer, but not really like the same thing as prayer. Or like,
I think a lot of us actually saw our practices, maybe see our practices as an alternative to prayer.
That's right. Exactly. Because what do you want organized religion?
Exactly. There's some resistance in there. And I frequently say that people are running to yoga because they're running away from church. And I think that that's true. And I think that's okay. But I think it also raises a hell of a lot of questions like, okay, then what are we really doing? Because if I don't know, are we just making shit up? Are we taking up somebody else's religious stuff and treating it like a gimmick that we can just play with and then set it down when we're done? Are we paying $20 an hour to have an ethnically spiritual experience? And then we go back to our, like, it raises a heck of a lot of questions.
It does. But you see, for me, I think it also came down to, like in the past, you and I both spoke about how there was this overemphasis on asana practice and accomplishing the forms. And we were both interested in these other aspects. And that's why you went off and did 3 years without even really doing asana classes, but still teaching yoga.
Right. Right.
Which was all about relationship and inquiry, right?
Yep. But it started with asana. I did not come in trying to save my soul. I did not come in believing anything or anything like it started in asana. And I still practice asana. And to some extent, like even if we're like, I'm leading a group through the Yoga Sutras right now, we're taking 1.5 years to do just book 1. And then we'll do it. And we awesome. Usually do like 2 or 3 poses adapted to breath in order to have a inquiry meditation kind of thing. So like I am still teaching embodiment, but I am so done teaching the hour and a half long asana class. And I think that as much as the teacher training model is a problem, I also think that class model is a problem.
I mean, I really appreciate that. In fact, everybody who's listening to this, who's in my teacher training knows I started off talking about that very thing. Like there's some fundamental things that you kind of have to overcome because of group class context. And at least, and maybe they can't be overcome, but I think sometimes they can. And at least some awareness around that gives you a chance.
Just gives you a chance.
Yep. But I hear what you mean because it's so interesting to me, you start by wanting to delve into the subtler aspects of practice and not have it be about strength and flexibility and sweating necessarily. Mm-hmm. So it becomes about inquiry, and you land at like faith and prayer.
Yeah.
And me too, you see? And like I said to you in the email I sent, it's been kind of amazing to me that in this last year, when I've really been honest with myself about what do I do actually in practice? Like, what is my practice now? It absolutely is prayer more than anything else on a lot of levels. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And one of those reasons is what you were writing about, is that it's sort of an antidote of sorts to despair.
Mm-hmm.
And you also made it like, you also talked about despair as a kind of a generational thing, potentially, like there's a Gen X version of it or something?
Possibly. Although then at the end of the piece, I also throw that out and just, like culturally, we're in a moment. We're having a cultural moment. And for many people, that experience is boiling down to, I feel so powerless in the face of this. And at the same time, there is this pressure to, I have to do something. So it's it's like anxiety in cultural form. Like we feel like we have to do something, but almost disbelieving that we can fix it. And what are you left with then? Like it's a big, what do you do with yourself? And a lot of people, I don't know, you stick your head in the sand or you try really hard and you burn out. And I'm not saying or in any way intend to suggest this is what we should do. Because I think it's so much more complicated than, we should all be doing this.
Well, you described the despair as repressed futility.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was perfect because it does, like, if you look at the broader world, and I know you've been involved in like social justice stuff in your life, you know what I mean? You look at the bigger world and you sort of see, you get honest with yourself about like who's holding the levers of power and what actually is shaping change or not shaping change. And there's a certain potential feeling of futility around things, around that. And yet you still want to be a good person and do good in the world. And you're a yoga teacher. So you're having these rituals and you're having these inquiries to try to like vibrate a certain thing in response to all of it. But that, especially over the last few years when it got like dialed up a notch, it's like a baseline, like there's like I was saying at the beginning, a melancholy or like a substrate of despair in that potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that sense of futility or powerlessness really goes to the heart of how I understand yoga. If we can circle it back to like my early years that were strictly asana, it was very much a figuring out stuff I thought was impossible wasn't. And other things that I like wanted, or, you know, that's stuff I did take as being like, this is real, they weren't real. So it was this coming to understand literally through my body, and an ability to kind of watch my body mind, like my thinking and my emotions, and like, why is this happening again? And why is this happening again? Starting to really understand where I feel powerless. I'm usually not, that I do actually have power. It's just not all-inclusive power. I can't just manifest through wishing that, you know, I wish myself into wellness, or I wish myself into handstand, or I wish the world were a better place. That doesn't work. I actually have to do something, but I do have some power, but it's limited power. Just like what I can do with my body is also, there's a heck of a lot of potential in there, but it's also contingent potential. Like I can't just do anything, but I can do some things. And for me, my yoga practice is figuring out, where am I trying to do stuff that I can't? And the like sense of futility that comes from that. And where am I turning away from the things that I actually can do?
So interesting. I've been having this conversation these days about the things that you can actually do. Mm-hmm. And like in terms of even practice, and it came out of sometimes this conversation around meditation, actually, because when sometimes people talk about meditation like a verb, I'm not sure what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Like we're doing something, we're paying attention to breath, we're paying attention to thoughts, we're focusing attention in some way, or there's any number of things we might be doing while sitting. But what is meditating? And often meditating, they talk about yoga as being both a practice and a state. Mm-hmm. So there's things that you do that kind of set a stage, or then bring about something that isn't the doing. Right. And I guess that's where the confusion point comes in about when the doing stops and when the fruition of the doing begins, or maybe I don't know if it's that. Right. And I'm not sure that we can necessarily do that state. Exactly. Sometimes our practices kind of prepare us for it, but I'm not sure that you can just like calm your mind, right? Like that's a thing that is said, but I'm not sure we can do that. Yeah, I think you can get more consistent at setting the stage for it, and and knowing, like any kind of creative process in a way. Yep. Where absolutely. You could get more consistent and getting into the zone you need to get at to let the muse take over. Yep. But at some point the muse takes over is where I'm going. Absolutely. And that's not you. And that's not me. Which then brings that to the is that God? Exactly. That's exactly it. That's how I got there and started asking people about God and spirit. Because I feel like in these moments of despair, some very deep despair over the last 2 years, I know we've all been going through it in our own ways. There's been moments of real, what I would call surrender and receiving guidance. Mm-hmm. Where I felt like I received guidance. And it felt like it wasn't coming from something bigger than me. Yeah, I agree. I am familiar with that experience. And I'm just, okay. And I say, I'm being honest with myself. Okay, that's what I'm doing when I go on these walks in the woods. It's a prayer that's happening, and it's doing something really important in my system. Like I could feel it. Mm-hmm. And that's what you were writing about in this new piece. You said prayer works. Yeah, it absolutely works. But then I can trouble it further. It works for what? Yes. Is just that self-soothing or self-regulating, is that the point? It might be, and that might be important. Mm-hmm. But I think sometimes if that's all we're doing is trying to regulate ourselves, what are we missing? See, but that's the doing. like we were talking about doing. See,
Yeah.
doing is when there are times when I have to do that. Absolutely. You know, I was like not anywhere near it. And I have to do to kind of rein my attention in and get myself back from wherever I've gone.
Right.
But the prayer thing is when that becomes a more ingrained process in you, and it isn't as hard for you to get to a place and a focused place inside yourself, which I do think over time, all the practice does kind of pay off at some point.
Yep.
You have a stabler ability to do that or more consistency with it.
Yeah.
And then it's been about these other things. Like I just had Nishala Devi on a few weeks back. She wrote this revised edition of the sutras talking about the third and fourth padas, talking about all the places where it's not the doing.
Yeah, exactly.
And how it gets into a place. And once you go to that place, it does get to kind of like, I don't know what to call it, a spirit realm, you know? And that for a lot of people, and this goes back to conversations you and I have had about in the past about the industry, it feels like you're talking about religion. And I think for a long time, we were trying to keep yoga away from religion, like you were saying. We were like, and so it's been an interesting thing to but to embrace what I think is actually part of yoga, though. And you're saying, like you were saying at the beginning, but I don't think it has to mean like cultural appropriation of other people's religions, that there's something very primary and there is something universal.
Yeah.
In like embodiment practices and study of the Yoga Sutras and stuff.
Yeah, I agree. But there's also, I mean, we can cite Patanjali, and that the point of yoga is not samadhi. Prajna comes out of samadhi. Wisdom comes out of samadhi. And I think oftentimes that's the confusion, is that we think we're trying to get to some sort of Zen state or some sort of spiritual accomplishment, or that our prayer practices, our spiritual practices, our whatever, are just in and of themselves, they're done. They're good. And they are. But I think that they also then are a catalyst to really understanding yourself, really understanding the circumstances, really understanding what's going on and what is it that I'm being called to do here. But that the spirituality, it's a thing that happens, can happen, might happen. And then sometimes when you really want it to, it won't. There's also that piece. But I don't know that is necessarily, can we aim at it? Can we teach it? How do we teach that? Hard questions.
They are. And it again, it comes back, even for me, some of these conversations I mentioned about meditation came out of me feeling like, I don't know how to teach anyone how to meditate. What does that even mean? I mean, I've got like forms I use and some ideas that have been very helpful to me. But ultimately, it is a personal, and I want to say something like intuitive process or something.
Yes and no. Like I kind of want to be like, well, the word meditation could mean so many things.
That's right.
It can mean just sit there. It can mean something very formal. And depending on like where you've studied and who you've studied with, what you're doing, like you are doing something. And then for some people, it does mean just that like mindful pause. And I think that whole spectrum, like each of the different techniques or technologies, and there are techniques and technologies, they kind of have different, a whole set of different presumptions, and this is how you do it, and these are the stages, but there's also a piece that I think we probably should be talking about more in the yoga world or the yoga industry. Whether those two are the same thing or not, I don't know. There's a role for mentorship, and I think that meditation can be something that can be taught more effectively when you have somebody you're talking about. What are you doing? What are you doing when you walk in the woods? What are you doing when you wake up in the morning? What are you doing at the beginning or the end of your asana practice? What are you studying right now? What's coming up in your relationships right now? And so I think meditation can be something a little bit more guided and directed than just sit and notice what happens. Now, early in my yoga, it was all asana. And I was having these like, what in the world is happening to me? I am changing. I am a different person. I am able to do stuff like relational stuff that I couldn't do before. What is going on with me? But I was lost in the yoga industry for finding guidance. I just couldn't. I'd ask questions and they would be deflected to mystical platitudes, or literally people would just be like, oh, just, go to the next teacher training. But teacher training doesn't give you those answers. So I was just lost in like, where do I find somebody to guide me through this stuff? So I was actually spending a lot of time in Buddhist meditation circles, and I was working with Michael Stone really closely for many, 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 many years. So I kind of had this mentorship, spirituality relationship that was related to my yoga practice, but I wasn't finding it in the yoga industry. And I still have mentors and things like that now, but they're not in the Buddhist tradition. They're in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, or they're in Desikachar's lineage or something like that. But I still have mentors who kind of are guiding. They're like, try this for a while and see what happens. So it's not just me sitting.
I mean, I really, it's so intrigued to hear what you're saying. I don't know that I have like a mentor I go to right now. I think I had that at some point in the past, but not so much now. Those are not easy to come by these days.
They are not easy to come by. And it's so hard to figure out what is that relationship about. I swear that is the only reason I am still practicing. I think it was the reason I was able to teach as long as I could, was that when I needed to, I found, or they found me. Often they found me. But individual relationships where it's like I wasn't just signing up for their material. Right? Like I wasn't just signing up for their weekend.
The content. It wasn't about the content.
It wasn't about the content.
Yeah.
And it was more about like, I could see that they knew something I wanted to know, or they had a wealth of experience that I wanted that. Like, what is this? What is this? And I could see that they kind of had it. But then when we would talk, it was also, they were more interested in me than they are in the content.
Right. And you can feel that when
I can absolutely feel that. So that like, if I'm getting all fixated on the content, which I will do sometimes, and like, what is this? I have to understand what this Sanskrit thing is. And
yeah, it's fun.
And they'll laugh at me, and they'll be like, that's bullshit. Don't worry about that thing. What's going on with you? Or do you realize that you're doing that cycle again, that thing that they call me on my shit.
Yeah, I know, but sometimes it's so interesting because I have that voice inside me that calls me out on shit. It'd be nice to have somebody else help with it, because you can certainly have your blind spots.
Yeah.
But I was just talking about this recently, because you've done these like group Zoom sanghas, these group discussions where, like I'm like recording some pre-recorded material of stuff I want them to think about or whatever, right? And then we have these meetings scheduled. That's time for us to have discussions around these. And, I often come to those meetings with some things that I have in mind, like that I'm thinking we're going to get to. We don't have to, you know what I mean? I'm willing to go wherever the sangha needs to go, but I've got a couple of bullet points in my back pocket if nobody came with anything.
Right.
But in a certain way, like in a very pure, like Desikachar kind of way, when you hear the stories, in a way, it's almost like part of me is like, if I show up to one of those meetings and no one's got any questions or has anything that they want to talk about, part of me is like, okay, we're done. I'll see y'all later.
Yeah.
I don't do that. I don't do that. But like, to the point that you're making, and it's the point that Jessica Char was kind of making as a teacher, is that it has to come from that person.
It has to come from them. It has to come from them. And I think that actually has been a huge part of my, like, I'm done here. I'm leaving because this way that this is set up is not working for me, because it will be like people just stare at you and expect that you're going to, I don't know, present on something, perform something, give them the handout, guide them through the curricula. And you've said, like, there's no fucking curricula.
Yeah.
What's coming up for you? What do you want to know? And unless you have a question, there's nowhere for this to really begin.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a skill to studentship and learning that I don't think is really part of the industry. Right? Well, like I think there's a difference between you're getting the information and you've actually learned it.
Yeah. Jessica Char said there's teaching for information and there's teaching for transformation.
Right.
Yeah. And you know what I did was, like, again, I did a series of things to mitigate exactly what you're talking about in order to make myself feel okay about doing this online training. And one of them was having all these conversations at the beginning, like before people were even agreeing to do it a lot of times.
Yes.
About how I don't believe that I'm a knowledge holder and then you pay me and then I give it to you, as you're describing, that Absolutely. It has to be like a co-creative process. And that's, people are like, what does that mean exactly? You know what I mean? Like when you say that, and it means what we're talking about. It means that I show up with whatever experience I have and what I'm like bringing to the table for us to utilize for myself and for anybody else who might utilize it. But I'm inviting whoever is inquiring with me or studying with me to be doing the same.
Yeah.
And I think that is a different, like, teacher-student dynamic.
It is.
We talked about that in the past, if I remember. And that's different than what you're describing with the mentor, though, is it, or not?
Possibly. I mean, in running like a group, facilitating, like we're gathering to talk about whatever, then there will be a topic, or this is the text that we're going to look at, or let's look at this part of the body and what bodies do, or whatever it is. And that is, being a student, being a learner, there's a skill to it. And I think that we are not. I was actually telling somebody the other day that what if we thought of a yoga teacher's job not as teaching yoga, but as teaching people how to learn yoga? Like it's tiny little difference. But instead of like, I am now performing, giving you the content, we're going to do it together for an hour on a mat, and then I don't know what, but something else. Like, what if instead of that, it was our job to kind of say, here's the landscape. Here's how you can find some stuff. You should actually be going home and doing some yoga things on your own, whether that be meditating or asana or reading or but this is something that you should be doing and you should be participating in. And I can give you lots of resources and ideas about how to do that. But what we're doing here together in this hour is not yoga.
It's so incredible to hear you say that. I've certainly considered we talked earlier about the group class conundrum. I have always considered my group class to be where someone could learn the things that they would need in order to be able to do their own practice.
Yeah.
And what I hear when you say what you just said is that the source, like where you learn the yoga from, isn't me necessarily. Like I'm giving you, or whatever, I'm facilitating, like you're saying, a process. And then ultimately, the source, though, where you get it from, where the wisdom and understanding is coming from, is something internal. Absolutely. But it's bigger than us too. Maybe you see, like
absolutely. I think that it is like so many students these days don't even know what the word sadhana means. And I think it can mean lots of different things, but this idea that like, yeah, I can give you here's 3 poses, here's a pranayama, here is a book you might be really interested in, or even like a meditation app. But then the student has to go and do the thing and then come back and like, let's talk about what happened. It can't all be on the teacher to, okay, now we're doing our yoga and then you're done. There has to be some personal practice.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.